So when Ms. Knox asked me to speak and asked what I wanted to talk about, of course, primary care is my passion and preventative medicine is one of the things that I love to talk about. So I said, well, let's start with health screenings. So this topic is knowing your numbers, health screenings, why, what, how, and when. So our objective today is we're going to just briefly talk about why we need to be worried about health screenings. It's just one slide, so it's going to be very brief. And then we're going to talk about some recommended screenings and what those screenings mean and how they can help you prevent some chronic diseases. Okay. And as she mentioned, we have some MSU physician assistant students that are with us today to help with health screenings, as well as my nurse, Renee Pickard. If you were able to do it before you came in, if not, they'll be out in the lobby when you leave and you can stop and they can check your blood pressure, they can check your blood sugar, and help you calculate your BMI. So we appreciate them being with us today. So I wanted to start with this verse. This is a verse that's very personal to me. And I know that health screenings can be scary. So nobody woke up today and said, I want to be diagnosed with diabetes today, right? Nobody woke up and said, man, I hope I have hypertension. So it's scary to go to the doctor and get your test and get your annual physical because y'all are scared of what we're going to tell you. And we know that. And so we need to start with knowing that you are a purposeful creature and that your health matters. And that's why we do this, okay? All right, so this is the one boring slide. This is the burden of chronic disease in Mississippi. It's bad. I think everybody in this room knows it's bad. Those numbers are not good, okay? And so this is why it's important that we have lectures like this, we have community events like this, so that we can try to make a difference in these numbers. Okay, next slide. All right, and then this is a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about a lot of screenings, and these are guidelines for the general population, okay? Your physician may have different screening recommendations for you. Those screenings are based off of your personal risk factors. You should always defer to your physician for what screening they said. So if your physician tells you need to have your cholesterol checked every 6 months, don't tell them Dr. Anderson said something different, okay? You go by what they said because they know you better, okay? And nobody wants to be average, so just do what they say. That'll be the best way to go, okay? All right. So obesity. In previous kind of medical talks, we kind of focused on obesity as a consequence of lifestyle choices. And we really have kind of changed that based off of some genetic information we're getting and just some chronic disease management stuff to know that obesity is a chronic disease. It's not always a consequence of lifestyle. And so we screen for obesity and we talk to you about obesity because often obesity is kind of the base that these other diseases build off of. So it's you have obesity and hypertension, or you have obesity and diabetes. So that's why I wanted to start with that. All right, next slide. Sorry, y'all, I don't like having my back to the slides, but we'll get through it. All right, so in medicine, when we go to these public health conferences and they release our public health data, we always are like, please don't let us be worse than Alabama, right? That's what we always think. So in 2023, for the first time in like 10 years, we were worse than Alabama in obesity. But the good news is in 2024, we were lower on the list. Still worse than Alabama, but lower on the list. So we have improved these numbers, and when you see the maps for 2024, they'll be better than what this map I'm showing you is today, okay? So when we talk about obesity, we talk about BMIs. And so when I measured some people out there earlier, I did you in centimeters because that's what the BMI calculation is on. And there's lots of apps that you can calculate this yourself. So if you just Google BMI calculator, you can put your weight in and your height in, and it'll tell you what your BMI is. And then that number we use to classify you as what you are on the weight scale. And so you can see the numbers of what BMI translates into in forms of when we talk about obesity. All right, next slide. All right, hypertension. So I feel like in Mississippi we've done a good job with screening with hypertension. I would imagine most of y'all have had your blood pressure checked in the last 6 months. Would y'all say that's correct? So we've done a good job with this. It's still an issue, and it's still something that we need to address. And some of the reasons we need to address that are these facts. So having high blood pressure puts you at risk for heart disease and stroke. You can see the big numbers, but there's a lot of people who have high blood pressure in the United States, and those numbers get higher when we look at the Southeast. But it's important to know that even though we are good at diagnosing blood pressure, we're not real good at treating it. So if you take 4 adults who have high blood pressure and look at their numbers, they're still not at goal. So even though we're doing a good job diagnosing it, we could improve a little bit in our treatment of it. So how many of y'all know how often you should have your blood pressure checked? What do you think? How often? Yep. 3 times a week? Wow, I like you. You're daily? Okay. All right, so statistically, if you have no risk factors, you should start having your blood pressure screened at least once a year over the age of 40. So it sounds like y'all are above the ball on that. And I'm not discouraging that. Keep doing that, because that's a great number for you to know and for you to monitor. All right, so the next slide, we'll just talk about what the definition of hypertension is, just so you can kind of know what these numbers mean to medical people when we check them. So of course, you know, when we talk about your blood pressure, it's 2 numbers. The top number is what we call the systolic blood pressure, and the bottom number is what we call the diastolic blood pressure. So normal is anything less than 120/80. After we get over that, in between 120 and 130, we say it's elevated, okay? And then in your 130 to 140 range, we call that stage 1 high blood pressure, okay? And then after 140 is when we say blood pressure, and that's when we say you need medicines, okay? So that's just kind of the ranges. So when you're looking at your numbers, you know this is what this is translating to a medical person as. Now, one of the questions I get asked at least once a day is, what's a too low blood pressure? Okay? So the answer to that is, if you are up walking around, your blood pressure is not too low. Okay? When we worry about too low blood pressures, it's people who are sick and not able to perform activities. So when we check like marathon runners, their blood pressures will chronically run in the 90s, and they're fine. So, you know, that's one of the things when people start checking their blood pressure, they always get worried about, well, I know what too high is, but what's too low? And you can talk to your doctor about your specific ranges, but in general, if you feel fine, then we're okay with what your blood pressure is, okay? And then also, this is one of those categories that will change based off of your other medical diseases. So this is one of the things where somebody may have put you on medicine earlier than the stage 2 that I just talked about, okay? All right, diabetes. So everybody raise your hand if you know somebody who has diabetes. Everybody, right? Diabetes is very prevalent, and that's a whole other lecture about why that is. But diabetes is kind of really fun right now in medicine. So when I went to medical school, which is more years ago than I would like to admit these days, there were 3 different medicine classes to treat diabetes. There was metformin, which most of you have heard of. There were sulfonylureas, and there were insulin, and that was all we had. Now, if you come in and I diagnose you with diabetes, there's 11 different classes of medicines that I can offer you. So that's really amazing to know. In the last 10 years, we've gone from 3 classes of medicines to 11 classes of medicine. And more important, these medicines have changed the way we look at and treat diabetes. So in the past, when I first started practicing, my main focus was your sugar. I was just trying to keep your sugar above a high level. That's all the medicine I was giving you was going to do. The newer medicines are looking at actually reversing the damage from the sugars. So it's kind of a really cool place to look at research, and it's exciting, all the changes that we're seeing with diabetes. But diabetes, like we just saw, everybody knows somebody that has diabetes, so it's got a strong impact in Mississippi. And you can see the numbers, but it's estimated that over 17,000 people each year are diagnosed with diabetes in Mississippi. And the cost of treating diabetes is extremely high. Because like we talked about, these chronic diseases lead to end-stage organ damage. So when we look at the cost and we look at that $3.4 billion, that's talking about people who had heart attacks and they had strokes and the cost to treat those. So if we can treat the diabetes, we can decrease that overall economic impact that the disease has. So we all know somebody who has diabetes. How often do you think you should be screened for diabetes? Once a year? Twice a year? Any other guesses? All right, so if you are an average person with no risk factors, it's recommended that you have a fasting glucose test at least every 3 years, starting at the age of 45. Okay? So who in here thinks that they have no risk factors for diabetes? Raise your hand. That's good. Nobody raised their hand because y'all are right. All right, so what are the risk factors for diabetes? Being overweight or obese, being over the age of 45, having a parent, so it's very genetically linked, being physically inactive, having what we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, being of certain ethnicities, having previously had gestational diabetes, and then look at those bottom two. Just living in the Southeast United States puts you at risk for diabetes. And living in a rural area, like we all do, puts us at risk for diabetes. So we don't meet the general screening recommendations for that. So how do we screen for diabetes? There's different ways, but people with risk factors, the best way to screen is through what we call a hemoglobin A1C. So this test measures your blood sugars over a 2 to 3 month average. And this is what the normal levels are. Anything below 5.7 is what we call normal. If you're 5.7 to 6.4, we call that pre-diabetes. And then anything over 6.5 is classified as diabetes. So here's another thing to know. When you have an A1C that's over 6.5 and you're diabetic, even if you get another one that's not, from a medical standpoint, you're still diabetic. So it's kind of like when your blood pressure gets treated and it's normal, you still have high blood pressure. So it's important to know that if somebody's ever told you you're diabetic, that's how you need to live your life, and that's what you need to tell your doctors, okay? So some other ways we can screen for diabetes is through a fast and blood sugar. And that means that you haven't eaten overnight. And these are the recommended numbers of what's normal and what's not normal. I'll tell you in practice, usually we will do a fasting blood sugar if somebody has no risk factors. And then if this is abnormal, we order an A1C. Okay? The really standard of care now is to do an A1C. And then the final way that we can test for diabetes is a glucose tolerance test, which anybody who's had a baby knows what that is. And we don't use it as much just because there's better, quicker tests to do, but it is a way that we can screen. All right. So our next topic we're going to talk about is hyperlipidemia, or high cholesterol. So how often do you think that you should have your cholesterol checked? Every year? Twice a year. Every 6 months, yeah. All right, so the medical answer is if you have no risk factors, you should have your cholesterol checked at least every 4 to 6 years. But like we talked about with diabetes, most people in here have risk factors, so your answers are right. You should have it once a year or every 6 months, depending on what your risk factors are. And so here's a chart that just shows you the levels of cholesterol and what they mean. When we talk about total, we would like that number under 200. That's kind of your goal. Generally, we don't start treating until you get above 250. In that borderline middle row that y'all see, that's where we really try to focus on lifestyle changes. Anything on that low line, then they're going to talk to you about cholesterol medicine. Okay? We talked about the new diabetes medicines. There's also new cholesterol medicines that are coming out, and it's some really cool things. They're researching a shot that you can take for your cholesterol, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be a shot that you can have every 6 months or once a year, and it will treat your cholesterol, which would be a lot better than having to take a pill every day, right? So y'all look at that in the news, and when it happens, talk to your doctor about it. So the other things we look at for cholesterol when we're looking at the breakdown is your LDL, and that's what we mean when we say your bad cholesterol. If anybody has ever talked to you about your bad cholesterol, they're talking to you about your LDL. Your HDL, that's the one that we want a little higher, right? So you want that to be over 60. And that's the one I always tell people is really affected by your diet and your exercise. So if you ever want to make your HDL better, then the best way to go about that is through your diet and your exercise. And then your triglycerides, those are kind of your fast ones. Those are your quick ones. So if we checked y'all's cholesterol right now, your triglycerides would be high. So when we talk about having fasting labs, that's because of the triglycerides. Okay? So we just went through a lot of numbers that you should know. The final thing I want to leave y'all with is that there's one person you should know. And that person's your primary care doctor. You should know their name. You should know their office. You should see them at least twice a year. Okay? And that's the way that we can stay in front of these diseases and help prevent them. And then finally, again, this is my name and where I practice now. If you know where Anderson's Pharmacy is, my office is directly across from it, so that's where you can find me. Anybody have any questions?